Mr. Birdie, members of the board, we have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is the administrative salary ranges. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Roger Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birdie, members of the board, this is a pretty simple item here this evening. Our administrative salary ranges, we're simply adding a position to the salary ranges. It's the new food services director position, and it's a position for 223 days under range 1 of support administrators. That's the item I have for you at this time. Any questions about that placement?
Any questions?
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Mr. Martin.
All right, our next item for board discussion is 5-year forecast. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Good evening, our board members. I have for you an update for our 5-year forecast. As you well know, we give this presentation twice a year, usually in November and May. So tonight I am presenting to you the update since November, which I'm sure many of you know has many things have changed. So I hope to explain those to you tonight and answer any questions that you may have. So again, our purpose for providing this information is regarding our long-range planning of our financial outlook and meeting the school district's ability to sign the certificate, they call the 412 for certificate. And it also provides a method for the Department of Education and the auditor of state to identify school districts with potential financial problems. I first start with sharing some information about our revenue, and many of you have seen this before. Not much changes. We continue to rely on our local real estate dollars as our largest source of revenue for the district. This has increased slightly this year, while the yellow portion of our total revenue has slightly decreased. And we'll go into more detail again in just a few minutes, but I did want to point out to the board, the CARES Act funding that you have heard about recently, that money is to be set aside in a separate fund, much like the student wellness and success dollars. So the total amount that the district is going to receive is supposed to be $1,152,000. Again, that money is not in our revenue stream because it's placed aside in a separate fund. But eventually when we get to the expenditure breakdown, I will share with you how we plan to spend that money. So getting into the details of our revenue, our general property tax, again, we've seen a slight increase this year in collections, about 2%. But unfortunately with the COVID-19 pandemic, we anticipate many people possibly not being able to pay their taxes, which results in what we are projecting to believe about a 6.32% reduction in collections for next year. Our public utility personal property tax line item is one piece of our revenue that continues to grow slightly each year, and we are anticipating that to be almost a 4% growth over the life of the forecast. Unfortunately, it is just a small portion of our revenue, but it is a positive one for us. The next line item is our state funding, and latest results of that reduction, I think everybody has been hearing about, for our district involved a $1.6 million reduction that started actually this month, and it'll cover next month. It's being deducted from our state funding for May and June. So the 1.6 million reduction to our district really equates to a 5% decrease in aid from the state. With more rumors circulating, but not any official numbers yet, we are projecting that we will receive an additional 10% reduction for next year. And then I'm projecting that we have flat funding the following year. So what I'm looking at is a 10% reduction next year, and then maintaining that 10%, not receiving any increase. And then the following year, hopefully, the state will be back with a 5% increase to our funding. And then again, I'm leaving it with flat funding for the 2024 fiscal year. Very hard to predict right now because we don't know what our cuts may be. But again, we'll review this again in November, and I know by then we will have more information and have a much better picture. But that's what we're projecting as of now. The property tax allocation line item is for state reimbursements for the homestead and rollback taxes. We are projecting those to really remain pretty flat through the forecast period. Unfortunately, we had a slight decline this year of about $216,000 in that revenue piece. Under all other operating revenues and other sources, we are projecting a slight increase for this year. Our open enrollment numbers tend to remain pretty steady. We're down a little bit this year. We're expected to generate, as you see, 1.575 million, but don't forget we have children that leave our district. That'll be showing up in our expenditure items pretty soon. So we don't actually gain all that money, but we'll get to that in a few minutes so I can give you the actual amount. Casino revenue is another interesting variable for us. As you know, casinos have been shut down for a few months, but the revenues actually that we have received this year already increased slightly up about $16,000. Where we'll see the decline will be in the next probably 2 years with the casinos being shut down and things, gearing back up. So we are projecting a 30% decline for fiscal year 21 and 22. So overall, we are projecting just a slight decrease, just a little less than 1% for this year's revenue picture. Moving on to expenditures. These, percentages remain pretty constant. Again, because the majority of our business is personnel, between salaries and benefits, that equates to about 76% of our budget. Not surprising, but it is difficult when we look to make some reductions at times. There's not much that we can do beyond that, with like in purchase services or capital outlay. It's very difficult when you're looking at some cuts to really make a huge impact with those smaller pieces. Salaries, of course, is our largest point of expenditure. Our Classroom Teachers Association in the district did finalize a settlement agreement with, and I know Mr. Martin has covered this in a past meeting, but the 2.5% base increases for the next 3 years are included. Step adjustments for steps above step 12, and also an additional step at the top of the salary schedule. Those have all been included in the forecast. We actually started negotiations yesterday with our OPSI unions. We are projecting 2.25% salary increases for those support staff members. Reviewing what positions we've added for this year, those are listed. And then moving on to next year, we again are expanding our Fairfield Academy program. So we are adding 2 teachers there, our speech pathologists that we need. The instructional specialists are going to be helping with that one-to-one program with our computers with our students. The 3 elementary counselors that we're adding, those again are partially funded by the Student Wellness and Success dollars. We are adding a preschool intervention teacher and then 3 additional educational assistants for special education and preschool. We are doing a couple of reductions. 2 teachers are being reduced because enrollment numbers are not showing that we need those teachers. And Mr. Martin has shared with me that we are continually looking at our enrollment numbers, and as things enrollment changes, we may have other reductions possibly depending on what the numbers are showing. So for this coming year, we are reducing 2 teachers. And we also are not replacing Shannon Williamson, who we just mentioned resigned as our preschool supervisor. She was a half-time supervisor. We are taking those duties. Some of the individuals in the special ed department are taking some of her duties, and then we are also contracting with the Educational Service Center to pick up some duties, and that'll be shown later in our purchase services line. Our retirement and insurance benefits continue to be fairly consistent. We've had, again, excellent results from being a part of the optimal health initiative. We realized just a 2% increase in our medical insurance only this year, which is phenomenal. We are projecting about a 5% increase for next year, and then 7% increases possibly for fiscal years 22 through 24. We continue to rely on our employees to go to their wellness visits and their screenings and get their flu shots. And I really believe that has helped keep our premiums down, because they are trying to take care of themselves much more nowadays. We also have a great, lost my train of thought. Oh, I'm sorry. They also pay 20% of the medical premium right now, and they pay 10% of the dental premium. Purchase services for this year, some of the big ticket items that we've had. I know Mr. Penny's mentioned our paving plan. We still have a bus lease and HVAC lease that we pay. 2 school resource officers that we added this year, partnering with the city. Those are partially funded by the student wellness dollars. Additional special ed services, and also we've had some elevator repairs, and our new Final Form software that has come in to great use during this shutdown has been a real great addition for us. Next year, the paving plan continues with including the paving of the new storage building area. We're replacing an antiquated phone system, preschool services that I mentioned just a little while ago. That's going to cost $22,200 to contract with the Butler County ESC to help us with that. Continuing our bus lease and our HVAC lease payments. And then the next line item, Ed Choice Scholarships, we spent a lot of time on that in November, and I just wanted to update the board on where things stand. So we have basically been given a hold harmless for this coming year. So the legislation's been put on hold. We anticipate things are going to come back up and change, hopefully for the better for our district after legislature gets back to work. But as things stand right now, I left in some monies, because if they don't change, we need to be prepared for that. So I went through and revised our original numbers based on information we have now as to who may participate, those private schools that may participate in the Ed Choice scholarships. These are the updated numbers for fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23, and fiscal year 24. For supplies and materials, we continue to support our curriculum department with many of our advanced placement exams, technology or curriculum software, College Credit Plus items, testing materials. That continues. The newest item that was added is the last one regarding laptop covers. So our student machines, our one-to-ones, we want to try and protect those, and as long as we can, we've added $75,000 to purchase covers for those. For next year, continuing mainly with most of those same items, and also additional laptop covers for the next purchase that we will make. Our capital outlay for this year, this is really just a review of what we have done or in the process of doing. Again, in the process of making our first purchase of our technology one-to-one plan. And the new phone system hardware we are purchasing for $86,425. Along with the academy expansion and our storage building, all those are taking place right now. For next year, as you know, Mr. Penny's presented the maintenance facilities plan. We have gone back to that plan and tried to identify the most critical items that we felt needed to be addressed. Mr. Smith, Mr. Penny, and I have come up with these items listed. And outside of, let's talk about the buses and technology in a minute, but the fume hoods, the roof, the HVAC items, everything down on that list are the priorities we feel that need to be addressed for next year. Back up to the top with technology, that money for next year is going to be paid for, is going to be used by the CARES Act funding that we're going to receive. One of the allowable uses of that funding is student technology, teacher machine student technology. So that is what we are going to use the money for. So it replaces the general fund money that we would have used to make this purchase. We have decided to reduce our busing purchases from 5 per year to 2 per year in order to try to reduce some of the expenditures. So that's a savings of $300,000. And those priorities that have been set for the maintenance plan, we have put those priorities in place for the following years, but we know that may change based on things that may need to be addressed sooner rather than later. So I have included that in future years of the forecast. Our last item under expenditure details results in other expenditures such as banking fees, treasurer fees. This is where the open enrollment that gets sent out to other districts falls. And as you can see, the net gain from what comes in and what goes out is about $310,000. So overall, we're projecting our total expenditure increase for this year to be 4.83%. This is our graph of revenues, expenditures, and our cash balance. And as you can see, it's not a very favorable picture regarding cash balance. And to get to the actual numbers, based on the current projection, we will start deficit spending this year. And as you see, like I said, it's not favorable for the future, but we know that there's many variables right now. So things can change, but as it looks, we're trending toward needing additional revenue growth by 2022. Mr. Birding, that concludes my presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions from the board.
Other questions from the board? Comments?
Yes, I have a question. Great job, Nancy. Thank you. It's very thorough. I do have a question about the Ed Choice scholarships held harmless for fiscal year 21. So I'm assuming that the numbers that you have for 2022 are in case there's no further legislation that rolls that list of 1,200 students back, or 1,200 schools back, because I was under the impression that if they proceeded with what they already have, what's already been out there with Senate Bill 90, that we would not get those impacts for 2022 and 2023. So I was surprised to see those numbers. Can you give a little bit more information on that? And does that include the 9th grade scholarships? Because I thought those were also eliminated for 2022 and such. What are the details?
So here's an explanation. What I try to do is take what's in law right now and apply it to us without anything changing. And so what's in law right now is that this would be our impact. if nothing changes. Because they couldn't come to a conclusion before we shut down. So it may not be as easy as we think. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. I hope it does. I hope things do change, believe me. But I like to give you a realistic picture. If it doesn't change, this is the impact for us. And we may not know that by November when I do the next presentation. And Billy, I'll let you chime. I'm sorry, I'll let you chime in.
No, you're fine. So, just to refresh everyone's memory, it's been a long time, or it feels like it's been a couple years, but it hasn't. It only goes back to November. But, kind of where we were before, COVID-19 shut everything down, we had a positive feeling. We didn't have any guarantee, but we were feeling upbeat as a district in terms of the impact that Ed Choice would have on us. But it wasn't official because what we thought they were going to do never happened because they just decided to put it on a freeze. What we were hearing before everything shut down, based on what we were hearing, we believed that our district would not have any schools on the list. But they didn't finalize it. They didn't make anything official. All of that was unofficial and kind of what we were hearing, that we would not be affected as a district and would not have schools on the list. But everything came to a freeze. And so those numbers that you are seeing is if things, went backwards and we did not get the anticipated outcome that we thought we were going to get back in March. And Nancy does a great job of always just, trying to make sure that we don't get any surprises, on a forecast. So since that is a possibility that, after we come off of this 1 year being held harmless, we just don't know with 100% certainty what will happen. If it goes back to where we thought they were, then I think we have a pretty good chance of not being impacted, but it's not a guarantee. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. I just thought that Governor DeWine had signed off and basically mandated that it had to be frozen unless there was an extra push to go back and get the original list. So I was surprised to see those accounted for because I actually did think that he had provided some protection in the latest signing, which occurred after the shutdown, I believe.
Yeah, that's something, we certainly could look into, but it was our understanding, and I think others as well, that it was placed on hold. It was frozen where it was, and then we would come back to it and revisit it at a later date. Again, we felt good about where we thought we were headed, but no guarantees.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm glad those numbers are in there because until it's law, we have to account for the loss of that revenue. So I'm glad that it's in there so that we're not surprised if it comes back and we are hit with that those deductions. So any other questions or comments?
I have a question. So it looks like, according to Nancy, in 2022, we need some sort of additional funding. And what does that mean? Can you explain what that means, or what that, obviously that doesn't happen right at 2022. What happens before that, or what's kind of the planning? What's your thoughts?
So I'll explain it to you this way. If nothing changes, at the end, the ending balance in fiscal year 23 is about $9 million.
Mm-hmm.
And $9 million gets us through, basically we spend $9 million a month in expenditures. So we need to start having discussions earlier to address
Right.
where we're headed. Basically, there's two things we can do. We can reduce expenditures, or we can, pass a levy.
And when, timing wise, when do we need to start talking about that now? I mean, that doesn't seem very far away for me. So when do we need to start talking about that?
Depending on what the forecast is showing us next year, I would say by 21, end of 21, we need to probably have a plan as to
Okay.
where we're, because hopefully it would really be nice to have a state budget that we know what to anticipate is going to be coming, whether it's an increase or a decrease or nothing at all. A new biannual budget will be coming out next year. Hopefully we'll know, again, that will provide us more information for those following years. So we should be able to make hopefully some decisions one way or the other.
Okay.
And I see where that's a little bit of both, cutting expenditures and increasing revenue. As Mrs. Lane pointed out before, they decided to only go with 2 new buses this year instead of 5. And so that's saving us $300,000. So, I mean, that's just a small little bit, but again, it's a step in the right direction that, Mrs. Lane and Mr. Smith and the leadership team do look at ways to save the district money. It's not just a money tree that they go back and shake. So I applaud them for doing that. They see that there's going to be a slight decrease this year, and they figured out, well, where can we trim some of that? And so thank you very much for doing that.
We are, one of the things, I probably didn't mention this, we are not adding any additional positions after 2021. There are no additional positions in the forecast.
Also, Miss Lane, you spoke to it, but it's just so difficult to grasp what the state's doing, and what we had built in there in prior forecast, I think in the next couple of years was maybe a 2 or 3% growth in revenue, and that obviously has now changed completely. And then the money that they're taking back, they're taking it back immediately. It's not a projection. They're saying is it almost we have to give it back, or are we just not getting it for May and June?
Tomorrow will be our first reduction in a payment. Yes. So they have taken the money away from us in their normal, they pay us twice a month from the state. And tomorrow's payment is quite small compared to what it normally is. So yes, they're taking it. It'll be tomorrow, and then the 2 times they pay us in June, they're going to reduce those payments. And then, like I said, I don't have any idea what's going to happen starting in July.
There's certainly no accounting for any of that, right?
Right. We're, this year we have frozen the building and department budgets. People are not spending money unnecessarily. We have frozen. We should have some funds left from this year. Possibly we're asking that they only spend it if it's essential. Again, we're trying to cut here in little ways to try and save some money.
And I'd like to just give one more example. Nancy and I met with Joe, and in addition to those, reducing the number of bus purchases and some other things that have already been mentioned, initially we had some conversations with the board about, our maintenance plan. And, we've been working on narrowing that list for quite some time. And at some point we said, well, we will prioritize, and then whatever, we anticipated that the cost of those jobs would come in lower than what we were projecting. Mm-hmm. And we said that we would take those funds and just continue to go down that list and complete some of the other items listed. Since the announcement of the 1.6 million in cuts and anticipating future cuts, instead, we are now saying we prioritize, this is our list. If we save money, If those numbers come in lower, we will not continue to go down that list. We're just going to hold off on that and just really focus on warm, safe, and dry. So again, I just want to share that example. I appreciate Michael's comment. We do take this, very seriously. We want our community to know that, we work hard to be fiscally responsible, and every dollar matters. And we've spent hours already just brainstorming and identifying some ways that we can save the district and our taxpayers' money. So just wanted to give that additional example.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
I do have a comment. It's about some of our tax incremental funding. I guess I didn't see exactly where it's in here, but do we know or have it quantified somewhere in here as to the impact of those sort of TIF districts? I think Bridgewater is covered in one, some of the places out here in the township. But do we have any idea if we're anticipating drastic reductions in our TIF district funding?
That's included in the forecast. I did not put that in our presentation tonight, but I can get you those numbers easily, Belina and the board. I do not believe that I decreased those collections because they've been steadily increasing. I think I may have held them flat, to be honest with you. I'm not anticipating any more growth.
But what about reductions? I mean, that's the thing I'm worried about there. Do you think it might be dramatic, or?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
Time will tell.
Yeah. Yep. That's true. Okay.
Good question.
Thanks.
Mrs. Lane, thank you so very much. If there's no other questions, I really appreciate when looking at the actual forecast that you provide to us. I appreciate all the notes that you put below the data. It really helps you understand how you come up with those numbers. And a layperson can look at these and understand it. So I appreciate all that information. I know it's not, again, like Mr. Harry used to say, it's not your forecast. It's your interpretation of the forecast. So thank you for that. And of course, one of the things they teach you when you go to board member training is that year 5 should never happen, because it's a warning or a symbol of what could happen if you don't make appropriate steps to prevent that from happening. So I know that we've got great leadership with Mrs. Lane and Mr. Smith, and that we have a really tremendous board that looks over the money and makes sure that we don't get to the negative bank account balance in the year 2024. So again, thank you very much, and we will make sure that we address this in the year 2020, 2021, 2022, so that 23 and 24 don't happen the way that it's projected. So again, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
Yes, okay. Our next items for board discussion, we have a number of board policies that will be discussed this evening. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Roger Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members of the board, there are 7 policies here this evening to discuss. The first one is policy EDE. It's our Technology and Communication Services policy. And this policy is being updated. Our tech team has been working on this for several months, actually. And in addition to this policy, there are other regulations and exhibits, forms to fill out that are being updated as well. But because we're going to one-to-one technology for our students over the next several years, We felt that the policy needed updated in preparation for those tablets being given to high school students. It's also, we want to be consistent with current best practice in the area of technology. For instance, our policy, there's just some slight changes. One example is the internet content filtering. It said in the old policy, it said it may be filtered. Now it's definitely filtered, not on just some machines, but all district-owned computers. Most of the changes in EDE are more form than content. It's listing the various exhibits and regulations that are referred to. So those are the changes to policy EDE. Are there any questions concerning that one? All right. The next policy is actually several policies, but GBCB is our staff conduct policy. And ODE has been studying over the past year throughout 2019 the licensure code of professional conduct for educators, and the changes that we're seeing in the next several policies are a result of that. The staff conduct policy, GBCB, we're just really adding one line, and the line says that all educators are also required to comply with the licensure code of professional conduct for Ohio educators. And that's been updated. They've added a new component of that, which is how they use technology as well. So that's brought some changes to that. And then an update of the legal references that's also happened. Any questions about GBCB? The next policy, GBH, is staff-student relations. And this policy, it's actually the exact same policy as JM, so I'm going to talk about them both at the same time. That's the last policy on the list today. They're exactly alike, but because we have them in our policy manual so people can find it easily under personnel and students, it comes across as two different policies, but they're exactly the same. There are quite a few changes here, all of them strengthening the policy. It's added language around the new law that says that students, when it talks about a staff member's relationship with students, it's not just current students, but it's anyone who's been a student within the past 12 months. So it's expanded that period. It also expands the policy against staff members using any type of disparaging remarks or insults or sarcasm. The policy listed that it wasn't appropriate in some instances, and the policy is being changed to say in all instances, we don't want our staff members using those types of remarks towards students. It also specifies new professional, emotional, and social boundaries between staff members and students. And it adds some very clear language about staff members who perhaps would groom students in an inappropriate way. So that was also added. It expands confidentiality requirements, and it spells out that any violation of this policy would be reported to ODE for investigation. The legal references on this policy has been updated as well. Any questions about GBH or JM? All right, the next two policies, Mandy Aug is going to share with you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, members of the board, I have two policies for your consideration tonight. Both of these existing policies needed some very minor updates as a result of the new graduation plans policy that I introduced at the May 7th board meeting. So first is policy IKF, graduation requirements. It adds a new legal reference and a new policy cross-reference to that IKFC policy called graduation plans and students at risk of not qualifying for a high school diploma. And then policy IJA, career advising. This policy also supports the policy IKFC, the graduation plans policy. They added some new language here to state that career advising plans will be supplemented by the new required student graduation plans. And then the legal reference is updated, and policy IKFC has been added as a cross-reference. So any questions on either of those policies?
All right, the final policy this evening is policy IND/INDA. It's school ceremonies and observations and patriotic exercises. And there's just one very simple change. It adds a deadline for reporting compliance with this policy to ODE each year. It's set at each fall. It's now we have to report by October 1st. So that was the only change in that policy. Thank you, Mrs. Ogg, by the way. You did a great job with those. Any questions about any of these policies?
Any questions for Mr. Martin or Ms. Ogg? Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, our next item for board discussion is in regard to our next scheduled board meeting, which would be on June 4th. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I just wanted to have a conversation with the board as far as, when should we start to consider having in-person board meetings? To my recollection or my understanding that the governor and the Board of Health has reduced the stay-at-home order to being recommended instead of law. So I just wanted to have a conversation, when do we feel comfortable, as long as we can maintain the social distancing that's required of us, when should we consider going back to in-person meetings? So I'll open up the floor for comments.
I'll start. So my concerns with having face-to-face meetings soon is that, there is more and more evidence being gathered that the main type of transmission really is through droplets. And I know it's been recommended by the CDC that we wear face masks. And so I think if you're going to have a face-to-face meeting in June, or I think that's a little soon, unless the appropriate PPE is available. There are studies that show that just talking, when you're just having regular conversations, that there is some transmission. And yes, I know that 6 feet is typically what's recommended. But, when you're in an environment where there's so much conversation about what is the right thing to do, and modeling good behavior or appropriate behavior with PPE, I would think we'd want to model the behavior. And I just worry that it could be a little difficult to have a board meeting with PPE on. So I've noticed other panels. I've paid attention to some congressional hearings. And what's frustrating is when they start to talk, they always take the face mask off. Like, that defeats the purpose, because that's what you want it for. You want to try and contain the droplets. So I guess my concern is whether or not a face-to-face meeting where we don't use the appropriate PPE is the best thing to do, since the cases in Butler County have increased by like 264%. There's no diminishing of the cases. Just because things are opening up, the virus is still what it is. It's deadly for some people. And, just speaking personally, I am one of those at-risk individuals, and my child is too. because of pre-existing conditions. And I would be nervous about having a face-to-face meeting and, being in an enclosed environment anytime before, there's a little bit more testing and things like that, because there is asymptomatic spread. Love you all, but I would much rather stay where I am and having a meeting right now. I miss you though. That's just my opinion.
Anybody else?
It's so good to hear your comments and feedback and where each of us are all at. I tend to be less intellectual and more like instinctual, and I just miss everybody, and I'm ready to be back. I'm ready to be together, especially if we start to think about in the fall being back together. I feel like people need some sense of hope and normalcy. So I'm okay to be back together, but I don't want to put anybody in any circumstance that causes them worry or harm. So it's good to hear Belina's comments and feedback, because I guess I react from a different place. And so it's good to hear where she's coming from. I would be happy to be next to all of you right now, face to face. So that, I don't know that gives you an answer, but that just gives you, if June 4th we want to be back together, I'm happy to be back together, but I don't want to put anybody in a position that they're uncomfortable with or feel unsafe with.
Mr. Begley, Mrs. Gundrum?
Yeah, I think I would say, I think Jeff, I can't remember, McKinney, Mr. McKinney has us highly functional in this current setup, so I'm not sure it's essential that we come back together. You asked for a date, and I'm not sure I can give you a date. I think we should probably decide as it respects to the next meeting on June 4th and just kind of take it from there. And, I'm certainly in favor of opening the economy and doing all those things, but to me, it's a question of, is it essential? Is it important that we come together? We talked about the social distancing and the PPEs, and I'm not sure that the Fairfield Fab building really facilitates that well. So my vote would be no for June 4th in terms of face-to-face meeting.
Mrs. Gundrum?
I also am kind of leaning towards no for June 4th, and I do appreciate Mr. Begley's suggestion that we sort of think about it on a meeting by meeting basis. I also am in an at-risk category, and I know y'all probably can't see me the whole time, but I've been sitting here coughing tonight, and it's not that. I have asthma, but I don't, even with all the PPE in the world, I wouldn't want to subject you all to my allergies with all of this going around, because we do know, like Mrs. Shorter said, that there are asymptomatic people. And I also empathize with Mrs. O'Neill, though I do miss everybody. I miss seeing people. I miss seeing all of you. And I can't wait till we can be back together, but I would like to wait a little bit longer just so we're sure that we can do so safely.
Yeah, it does sound like, that's sort of the consensus of the board to wait. I want to start the conversation so that there's no end in sight. I wanted to at least have the conversation, see where people were, see how comfortable they are. And even when we do decide to come back eventually, we do have the law behind us that says we can continue to be remote until at least, if I remember, December 31st. So even if we decided to come back, we could come back, two or three of us could come back and the rest of us could be remote. We could do it that way. I think it's a great idea to at least just have this discussion, maybe each board meeting, to say, hey, where has the disease been over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, however, in between meetings, and where should we go from there? Where do we feel comfortable? I'm perfectly fine meeting remotely, but at the same time, I do think it would show that that things are getting better, that once we do meet in person, that life can start to return back to the new normal, but yet still function in person. And while it doesn't need to be face to face, it could be spread out. You know, we have wonderful facilities to where we could meet in gymnasium someplace to where we are 12 feet from each other and still meet in person. We don't have to be at the fab. We don't have to be in a small conference room. We could be in any one of our facilities, practicing social distancing, not shaking people's hands, make sure that we're far enough away, and all those protocols could be put in place so that we can come back before December 31st. So I do want to get that in people's minds to start thinking about that. And then, you know, again, we'll revisit this as a topic in open forum to where we are and where we should be going. And I definitely respect everybody's opinion, because this is a board of 5. It's not a board of 1, it's not a board of 2, it's a board of 5. And it should be where this board feels like we should be going. So I do appreciate your candid discussion this evening. And we'll just ask Mr. Smith to make sure it's on the agenda each month going forward, or I'm sorry, each meeting going forward until we can come back 100%. All right, thank you all very much.